We're going to start with our grand challenge number 2, cities, states, and corporations driving the market. And I'd like to introduce our moderator, Judy Dorsey. She's the founder of Brendel Group. She's a principal engineer there, and one of the few women I know in energy, and we've known each other a long time. We're not that old, Judy, but how long has it been?
We met when we were 12.
Yes, of course, and we're in our early 30s now. Anyway, so please welcome Judy Dorsey.
Thank you, Mari. Well, we can't beat Australia or New Zealand, but I wanted to thank our guests here today from Arizona, Michigan, and Nevada. And welcome to Fort Collins and to Colorado State University. Brendel Group is headquartered here in Fort Collins, and I'm an alma mater in mechanical engineering, so it's fun to be back at the Laurie Student Center in a different environment. This is a defining challenge of our time, the role of cities, states, and corporations in addressing climate change, and wanted to thank Governor Ritter as well as Jeff Ling. I know that Jeff is out sick today, and I'm not seeing Governor Ritter at the moment in the audience, but really it was their vision from the Center for the New Energy Economy of illuminating this as the defining challenge, and wanted to thank them for their leadership in getting our 3 esteemed panelists. We've had the chance to meet each other and talk about this topic. You guys are in for a riveting conversation. We will have time for your questions as well. We're going to start with some introductions to each of our panelists and a particular question that I have for each of you relative to your particular lens into this energy ecosystem and why you each have unique perspective to bring. And then we decided that the 3 kind of themes that we want to explore together during this hour are, first, amid all the bickering, where are we finding common ground? It can be depressing, and I think you'll find that our panelists today have some specific examples to offer some optimism and hope and good examples of bipartisan approaches towards clean energy and climate change. We also want to talk, our title includes corporations. We don't have a corporate representative here, so we really want to talk about the big plays by the private sector in this space and how that's really shaping cities and states' economic development strategies. Some pretty amazing big numbers out there when you look at the number of corporations that have signed up to work still in following the news of the U.S. potential withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. And then finally, we want to end on collaboration models. What's working, what's not. And when it comes to those collaboration models, we have cities, the states, corporations, and we'll kind of dive into some of the inner dynamics of that as we get going. So first, I wanted to start with cities, and with Mark Hartman from the city of Phoenix, and previously from the city of Vancouver. You're the director of sustainability there. And so I know I don't need to share with you why that's so important, cities, on this topic of climate change and clean energy. We know that global urban population is 9 times what it was 100 years ago, and that trend is not changing. People are moving to the cities. Larger cities account for 2/3 of global energy use and 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Cities are largely considered to be a little bit more nimble than states and federal leadership on climate change, and when you put them all together and you see the way that cities are pooling resources and combining forces into their own networks, they really have an active, scalable model as well. So I understand that you're active in some of these networks, including the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. So I guess the opening question, and maybe by way of introduction to the audience, Mark, I'd be interested, from this city level perspective, what are you seeing in Phoenix? How is Phoenix influencing state PUC and legislators? And also, that's kind of a 2-part question. What's on the ground? Paint the picture for us in Phoenix and how you're partnering with the PUC as well as state legislators. But then the second part of that question: how is Phoenix combining forces with other cities for greater collective impact?
Okay, so 7 questions, right?
Shoot.
Okay, good. So I will just kind of give an immediate response. And I'd say, I did want to comment, and I think it's really hard when you hear certain things, is that the story is really changing. If you look at the way it's been historically and what our future is, are two very different things. When I first came to Vancouver in 2006, when I was there, it was really interesting. I told all my friends and family, everybody, I joined sustainability at the City of Vancouver. And they go, sustainability, there's no such word as that. Like, what is that? Like, what does it mean? And I'd kind of describe it. They'd go like, what? Where'd they make up that word from? And had never heard it before. And that's just 11 years ago. And so, and really interesting, as such a change has happened. And globally, organizations like C40 that represent, in those cities, I think it's 88 cities in total now, represent 25% of the global population in those cities. And they're making bold changes to say, how can they get to, their ambition is, how do we get to a 50% reduction by 2020? And so some really ambitious ones. US-wide, part of the network, USDN you mentioned, is 160 cities. A few of you have seen you here. And really trying to say, what are the high impact practices we could do, and how would that change? And the future is really promising. It's interesting, I don't know if you've heard of the Covenant of Mayors. A year ago, they actually had 544 cities that had joined the Covenant of Mayors to take bold action on climate and do bold things. Since the US pulling out of Paris, it's now up to 7,400 cities, 7,400 mayors. Absolutely, that's 1 year has gone that incredible swing. And recognizing it really is, without, really there was nothing to galvanize anyone's goal of where they want to get to. It's like, we're going to reduce by 5% here. But without a long-term goal, without a long-term outcome, any road will take you there, because it really doesn't, you don't know where you're going. But if you've actually said, look, let's agree as communities, and Phoenix adopted a long-term goal to be a carbon neutral city, along with many other cities. They say, now we have to entertain the question, how do we get there? What is that pathway? And it's really inspiring. It opens a door to innovation and really partnering with, they can't do it on their own, with the community, with businesses, and state, other levels of government. But just even the power that cities have. I want to mention one thing is that, the City of Phoenix capital budget between now and 2050, in our long-term goals, is actually $200 billion. And US-wide, if just the city's budget, so this isn't state or federal, the city's budgets between now and 2050 of just today's dollars is $40 trillion. So is there a way, so here's the challenge, is there a way, if you had to spend $40 trillion, is there a way to do that, to achieve and meet the needs of the community, and also enhancing nature at the same time? Getting there, is there a way to do that? To really just look at how do we, these long-term outcomes, and Phoenix's definition adopted by council was improving quality of life for all, so for everyone, including future generations, while enhancing nature. So applying our ingenuity and cleverness to actually make nature better off as a result of us being on this planet. So really inspiring what cities are doing, and really bold moves. Even cities like Palo Alto, carbon neutral electricity now, and actually buying offsets for all their natural gas emissions. Just cities thinking of different ways in the short term and the long term to get there. And actually, cities like Copenhagen actually has their plan of 100% renewables by 2025. So really innovative ways that cities are kind of leading the way, and sort of partnering with all other organizations.
Awesome, great, thank you. And we know also that cities aren't operating islands. They're part of this ecosystem, and kind of bringing that up to the state. Cities have energy providers in the form of utilities. You mentioned Palo Alto being a public utility. And yet, if you look at energy use in cities in the US, a lot of that is provided from investor-owned utilities, which are regulated at the state by the Public Utilities Commission. And then also state government has a large role in how cities use energy. And so I'm gonna hop on over first to Joe in Nevada. And you are the chairman of the Public Utilities Commission. Been there about a year in that role, as I understand it. And prior to that, you worked with Governor Sandoval as his legal counsel. And As I understand it, Governor Sandoval, kind of like New Zealand, is a Republican governor who has kind of led the way in some regards in state-level clean energy legislation. So can you kind of talk us through what's going on in Nevada, and how are you working with the cities in Nevada in terms of making the state competitive in the clean energy space?
So thank you, Judy, and hi everyone. I'm Joe Reynolds. I'm the chairman, as Judy stated, of the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada. I flew in this morning from Reno, and I don't speak very often at events like this, being a utility regulator. But coming here was something that was really important to me. The title of this symposium of 21st Century Energy Transition and the outreach of Governor Ritter was something that is really at the forefront of what we're doing in the state of Nevada. We have a lot of issues that are going on, and they're really exciting. We're working hard to build what Governor Sandoval has referred to during his term as the new Nevada. And we're seeing a convergence of what I like to believe of business growth with environmental concerns and job development all coming together. And so we have companies such as Tesla and Switch and Apple and Panasonic, Google, just to name a few, looking at Nevada, relocating to Nevada. And those issues are at the forefront of what the Public Utilities Commission is doing. We literally have cases pending before me involving those entities. And we're also coming off the hills of what we'd like to think is a pretty historic legislative session where we passed, or I say our Nevada legislature passed and our governor signed a group of bills, for lack of a better term, involving net energy metering, electric vehicles, battery storage, renewable energy dockets, just to name a few. And we're trying to give those bills life, and that legislation life. And I see the role of the Public Utilities Commission in part of where policy ideas and bills passed by our legislature are implemented. At the end of the day, the Public Utilities Commission in Nevada is a creature of statute, and so the laws that are enacted by our governor and our state legislature, we intend to interpret as faithfully as we can. As you mentioned, my background is a lawyer. My wife is also a lawyer. But when I look at these issues, it's not necessarily as a lawyer. We have 5 children, and I ask myself, what makes the world a better place for my kids? I don't care if it's considered a Democrat issue or a Republican issue, but what makes the world a better place for my kids? And that's how I approach my role as the chair of the Public Utilities Commission and what we're trying to do in the state of Nevada.
That's wonderful, and it's a great kind of segue to introduce Mark Pichet from Michigan, but really operating on a more regional and national scale. And your words, you don't care if it's Democratic or Republican, it's what is best for our kids. And I was really encouraged to meet through Governor Ritter, Mark Pichet, and the work that you're doing in the Conservative Energy Network. And to maybe frame why that's so important, I wanted to take one moment because our subtitle here is Uncertainty in Federal Leadership. So just to kind of frame that as you then introduce yourself and the Conservative Energy Network, you know, when you look at the tenure of our panelists here, and myself, we've been through 4 presidents in the last 20 years, 2 Republican, 2 Democrat, and largely what we're hearing is that these are somewhat chaotic times. We heard Amy Harder in The Atlantic talk about chaos obscures Washington's biggest policy change. We are having some policy changes in the June 1st announcement that the U.S. will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. EPA working to dismantle Barack Obama's Clean Power Plan, working to undo banned drilling in the Arctic, and a lot of this is being drowned by general broad chaos on the federal landscape, even despite the Government Accountability Office, which is Congress's nonpartisan auditing arm, issuing their report urging Trump to act on climate change or deal with pretty significant economic consequences. So back to, nonpartisanship or working together in bipartisanship, can you introduce yourself and kind of really very eager to hear why conservative energy and what is the drivers and impetus and how's that going? Share with us some of the origins of your thinking of Conservative Energy Network.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Judy. There we go. I'm with you now. And thank you for having me here today. As Judy mentioned, I'm Mark Pichet. I'm the president and founder of the Conservative Energy Network. We are an organization of conservative clean energy organizations in 20 states across the country. There we are up there, largely in the Mountain West, in the Midwest, and in the Southeast. We are predominantly located in red to purple states because we tend to get thrown in harm's way, and those tend to be in red states. Ultimately, my day job is I'm actually a Republican political consultant. I run the largest Republican consulting firm in Michigan. Not only do we work with most of the predominant Republicans in Michigan, the governor, the congressional delegation, the Senate Republican caucus, we also raise all their money. This is an important distinction that I want to make. When we first got involved in conservative clean energy work, I made an important distinction that if we were going to be successful as conservatives advocating for clean energy, it had to be a different paradigm. Historically, conservative engagement in the environmental community and the clean energy community typically consisted of, and some of you may recognize this, I'm not going to pick on League of Conservation voters too much, but so conservative engagement historically was, LCV having a statewide conference and saying, conservatives, raise your hand, we're going to meet in the Lake Michigan room, right? And then, 20 people would get up and they go talk about why they're conservatives. For us, we are conservatives first and foremost who happen to believe in clean energy. And if we're going to make a difference, if we're going to ultimately depoliticize clean energy in this country, it's only going to happen by Republicans stepping up. And so what we're trying to do is create a safe place for that to happen. And the good news is that there's a new paradigm out there that we're just sort of catching up with right now. If you look at the polling data, Republicans by 2/3 or more believe in climate change and believe in the importance of renewable energy. The base gets it. And each year we get stronger and stronger as a party on these issues, frankly, as we get younger and younger. The biggest obstacle we have as Republicans to move the needle on clean energy are education. Most of the folks we work with still think there's a price discrepancy on generation. They still think that the only reason renewables are existing in today's society is because of subsidies. There's a new paradigm that folks just aren't caught up with yet. They're still dealing with 20-year-old data sets, 20-year-old arguments, and we're trying to change that. We're trying to infuse new messages and reframe clean energy in ways Republicans appreciate. So we talk about the economic benefits more than the environmental or public health benefits. We talk about the importance of national security to distributed generation and local generation and the threat to the grid. And framing it in faith is an important part for many conservatives, the biblical mandate to be good stewards for God's earth. These are important messages that move and compel Republicans. The problem we've had is there are two hills we have to climb, right? There's a political hill where we have to infuse Republican leadership with the will to get engaged. And then secondly, there's a policy hill. And we need to find ways that Republicans can support clean energy. By and large, Republicans are not anti-renewables. They're anti the way Democrats have constructed policy to support the growth of the industry. And so if we can find ways that Republicans, through free market constructs largely, can advocate for renewables, then we're going to depoliticize, then we're going to find policy outcomes that can be bipartisan, and we're going to make real progress in the nation towards the advancements of renewable energy. But as Judy pointed out, it's all happening at the states, in the city, and regional. There's nothing happening in Washington, and nor will there in the foreseeable future. So we're on the ground, we're boots on the ground. I am a Republican clean energy warrior, and I've got the bullets and arrow scars on my back to prove it. But we're here to stay, and we want to be part of the solution. Thank you.
Great. That is really encouraging, and thank you for taking those arrows. And on behalf of all of us working in clean energy. And I just would like to kind of build on that and see does that resonate from Arizona and from Nevada, and maybe even another area of common ground is on economic competitiveness and green jobs. So, Joe, do you want to chime in on Nevada, and how does that resonate with Mark is saying?
Well, to build on what Mark was just saying, I came to the Public Utilities Commission about 13 months ago because in Nevada we needed change, and we are dealing with 21st century technology, 21st century ideas, and sometimes trying to fit them into a 20th century regulatory framework or paradigm, as Mark mentioned, and it doesn't work. It doesn't fit. And so we need to change the way conversations are framed, these discussions are framed. And that's something, at least in Nevada, we have our Governor Sandoval that's leading on that. We have some really key legislators in our Nevada State Legislature that are leading on that issue. But really trying to make a 21st century energy future based on 21st century policies and laws, and allow those to flourish and thrive. Sometimes we talk about where the new energy frontier is, and I like to think it's actually out in amongst the tables in the conversations that occur around our family dinner table and amongst our neighbors and our friends to change the way that we think and view energy. So I appreciate your comments on that.
Mark, what do you think?
Well, certainly, Stanford did a really interesting study, all the states, and that it was between 78 and 86%, depending on the state, of people that thought climate change was legitimate and that government need to act on it. And really interesting seeing, as you go to groups of people and you say, or go to your family events and say, so what do people think? And really, it does resonate, and people do recognize, yeah, okay, I guess it does kind of make sense. And so, and the whole idea of renewable energy is, so we stop using the air like a landfill and recognize, no, we need to actually pull carbon out of the air and put it back in the ground where it came from, that approach. And so, no, absolutely, it really does resonate to say, no, we actually should be, we want to actually clean the air, and we want to have clean water, and we want to have clean environments for us, and that resonates with everyone. And so that's really, yeah, you definitely see that no matter what population. I know when I came from Vancouver and went to Arizona, they said, oh, you're going to have a hard time and stuff. And it's been awesome being in Arizona, and people are incredible. The community, we actually went out to our community in a poll with the city, and we actually people did Facebook ads, all kinds of things to get kind of community input. And 75% of people said they'd pay, the question we asked was, would you pay $15 more a month on a utility bill to have 100% clean energy? 75% said yes. And you think, a certain number are going to be low income, and they would have probably said no. So it's a really significant portion are willing to kind of contribute it. And 46% said they donate to a tree campaign, and so it's really interesting just seeing incredible, encouraging, kind of going out to community members and just asking them what they think, and people are very supportive.
Can I just add
please.
to that? I do want to, if you look at 2016, and at the state level anyway, I know there's some amazing things happening at the municipal, county, township level, but at the state level, the biggest clean energy wins in 2016 were actually in red states. The ballot initiative in Nevada arguably was a significant win for clean energy for renewables. The ballot initiative in Florida as well. But the two big legislative wins in 2016 were in Michigan and Ohio. The leadership at the state level, where we're having the most profound impact, is with Republicans. It's with Governor Sandoval, Governor Snyder in Michigan, Governor Kasich in Ohio, Governor Reynolds in Iowa, who is just a rock star on this stuff. Republicans are willing to step up and lead. But an important distinction here is the messenger. That when we talk about some of the themes that we're talking about here today, one of the reasons we've not gotten very far with Republicans historically is who's delivering that message. It's largely been coming from the left. And you got to have somebody who knows the secret handshake, who can talk to these Republican elected officials in language they understand. And one of the reasons, and so we've built our organization around people like me. It's the Republican consultant in Ohio or the lead consultant in Arizona. It's people who have the same relationships that we do. And so they aren't hearing why they should support clean energy or move towards a truly all of the above framework. From the outside, they're hearing it from their own consultants, from their own key influencers. And that's how we got Governor Kasich to veto the bill in Ohio, and how we got a Republican state senator in Michigan to increase the state's RPS by 50%. So there's opportunity here among Republicans, but I would not want these guys' job. They actually work for a living. They have the hard job. I'm just out there throwing, lobbing grenades from the distance.
That's awesome. So let's talk about who could be some of those other credible messengers that affect the red state governors. And our title here talks about corporations. And I think about the Fortune 100 companies and what influence they may have on states. And so I'm curious about the range of other messengers from you, Joe. But in particular, like you think about things like eBay moving to Utah and having aggressive renewable energy goals and making sure that that state would be friendly to the policies that they're trying to achieve. You hear similar things around Walmart, MGM in Nevada, Microsoft in the Northwest. So can you speak maybe to each of your respective regions, what you're seeing in terms of the play of Fortune 100 companies or other messengers that are helping to bridge these gaps? And as I understand it, just Walmart, last I looked, its greenhouse gas emissions were on the order of 100 million metric tons, and yet they have aggressive renewable energy goals. And when you add that all up, something like 60% of our U.S. climate commitment could be made just alone by the private sector and some, their commitments along with cities. So really curious about what you're seeing in Phoenix and what you're seeing across Nevada and Michigan or elsewhere on that front.
So a really great reference to that is the RE100 companies that have committed to 100% renewables, and even the 17 top ones, 17 gigawatts of energy they're committing to renewable energy. So incredible amounts. If you know what gigawatts are, it's a lot of energy. And actually just we're actually meeting with we're a regulated state from the utilities and meeting with investor-owned utility and talking with them. And actually we're at the table. We've brought Apple, Microsoft, Salesforce, Intel, Walmart, people from their energy departments all approaching our utility and saying, we as an entire city, all the people in the city as well as all the businesses and all these corporations all want a pathway in the long term to go to 100% renewables or at least 100% clean energy in the city's case. And so we need a pathway for you to provide it for us to move there, because the line that you're on to certainly reduce emissions very significantly over the long term, but still we're on a more accelerated pathway. How can you provide that? And so really interesting engaging with the large businesses on being major purchases of energy and making agreements for those long term that can really drive some of this investment. And so, no, I would say very active players and really inspiring to see the leadership of these corporations.
Just quickly, can you elaborate on then how the city is working with your investor-owned utility to help make that possible with the large corporations that are interested in meeting their goals in Phoenix?
So the typical, the immediate response, I shouldn't say typical, but immediate response was like, ah! And, but there's some real things that in the long term, like one of the things that I was really surprised at, and utilities are very interested in, is the advent of electric vehicles. And I see that, electric vehicles, as you move towards clean electricity, electric vehicles really can have a significant impact in decarbonizing cities. And so, our whole electric grid is, in the US, it's 55% load factor, meaning we're only using half of it as far as the total capacity. We could actually have double the amount of energy go on our entire grid without adding any extra infrastructure, just by better utilization, and so as batteries come into play. So it's really talking with them about how to bring on the right amount of energy at the right times, how to work on microgrids and those types of things. So there's currently a stretch argument for the utility to go, but still, I think that by approaching and us all coming together and saying, look, we need to work out a solution that works for us, your customers, it's been an interesting discussion, and I think we'll see the outcome as we go, but it's a very interesting conversation to have.
Great. And how about you, Joe, in Nevada? Are you seeing something similar?
Yes, and a few of the companies I mentioned previously, but to expand on that idea is we are seeing companies as a business value, as their branding, that they want renewable energy and to sustain their business from 100% renewable energy. I see that, but then also a convergence of these issues come from the ground up. And in Nevada, we have a citizen legislature that meets once every 2 years for about 120 days. And so our legislators are folks that hold quote unquote regular jobs and work in the communities throughout Nevada. And so they listen to what their neighbors want, they listen to what their constituents want, and they take that back with them to the legislature, and we have ears on the ground. And so it's both the corporate, I think, interests as well as from Americans, from Nevadans, want to see these changes coming together. That's pushing some of these conversations forward. Historically, again, in Nevada and with some of the regulatory world, there was a bit of an echo chamber, I think, sometimes, and a level of hubris that can get out when you don't have your ears to the ground, so to speak. And at least as the chairman of the Nevada PUC, I'm more interested sometimes in listening than speaking to learn what people are interested in. I think that kind of ties back into democratic principles, and the government's supposed to serve the interests of the people and supposed to serve the interests of businesses, as opposed to the other way around where it's dictated from the top down.
Actually, I just want to comment. One thing that's interesting is it triggered, as you said that, is that, back in Arizona, the previous perspective, when I was, when early in adoption of sustainability goals for cities, it was definite, all my peers were, we're all going to die. We'll never turn this our ship fast enough. Like, there's no way. And a lot of it was because at the time, oil companies dominated. They had the greatest market cap of any other sector in the world. And so how can we ever do this when they're the largest? And now just the market cap of Apple and Alphabet combined is greater than all the oil companies in the world combined. So it is definitely a changing marketplace of what that looks like and who's making who is really dominating the market and what are the values of those organizations is very much changing the flavor of where we are headed in the future and the way we're facing.
Were you going to say something?
I was just going to add on that a little bit. Again, when we're talking about the future and the theme of this symposium being the 21st century transition, I'm a Star Trek fan. Governor Sandoval is a Star Trek fan. And I had in my office in the Capitol 2 posters, and it was of the Enterprise being built. And one of it said, "Building Your Future," and then the other poster says, "Boldly Go." And we've carried that over into the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada. And as I like to tell my 5 young children, and we're also a Star Wars fan, The Millennium Falcon isn't powered by coal or gasoline. We need to have that mindset of going forward boldly into the future.
Well, in our family, we're Harry Potter fans. And there are all kinds of ways to get around with flue powder and broomsticks, et cetera. But that does really resonate. When we bought our Nissan Leaf, I said to our kids, just behold, there is no combustion engine in this vehicle. And one day, which to them is like, duh, Mom, electric vehicle. I'm like, no, I really want you to tell this to your grandchildren one day, that you remember the day that your mom and dad brought home the car that didn't have an internal combustion engine, and have them ask, what's an internal combustion engine? So I appreciate that boldly go. I also appreciate what you were saying earlier about being responsive to your constituents, and in that vein and spirit, I want to be responsive to my constituents, which is our audience here and listening at home. And I told you it was going to be riveting, and I could probably ask a million more questions. You guys have really, really interesting insight and experience here. So let's open it up to see if we have questions from the audience at this time. Do we have somebody to help run the microphone?
Just to create a point of clarity, a positive one. So I'm from New Zealand. I run a group called Pure Advantage, which is a research think tank and media platform focused on green growth. And I just think that we're on the front end of change in New Zealand, but we haven't always been. We're 80% renewable from electricity. We're part of the C40 or now C88 for Auckland, our largest city. And we have a new government that just came in largely through millennial shift, actually. We did some research in August that canvassed 1,000 New Zealanders, which is a large number for our data set. And 2/3 of millennials said they wanted to incorporate the impact on the environment in our measurement of GDP. So that's transformative, and that was really the swing that put in this new government, who have now aspirations for net zero New Zealand by 2050. That said, we haven't always been perfect. 50% of our emissions are from ag, freshwater purity issues and biodiversity loss, net deforestation, and 78% of our transportation has increased since 1990. But the point is, we focus on, we want to lead where we can and follow where we must. And it's about a systems view, so the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's really about going far and going fast. So, thank you.
I really appreciate the bringing up the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. I don't know if a lot of folks know what those are. But on the tail end, there are 17 different goals to help achieve sustainability and the ending of poverty and climate poverty as well over a period of 15 years until 2030. But my question is about local leadership, because what the Sustainable Development Goals are all about is taking these global goals and really implementing them at the local level. And since we're talking about cities and the power of cities and collaboration in this panel, what have you guys noticed or been doing in terms of electric vehicle adoption and infrastructure at your city and state levels? A little more than, I don't know if we heard from the gentleman from Michigan. So I'd love it if you could kick it off, please.
Sure, thank you for the question. I think that clearly governments that are closest to the people are most accountable to the people, which is partly our problem with Congress these days, right? I mean, we love our congressmen, but it's the rest of the other 434 that are bums. So I think we're seeing the greatest progress in cities where, mayors and city councils are most directly accountable, and where retaliation is, voter retaliation is most tangible. the more local the unit of government, the more progress that we're seeing. And I love the partnerships that we're seeing in Michigan in particular with mayors and state government to attract some of the businesses that we've talked about here, that there are now new partnerships in economic development centered around energy. You know, it used to be when states or cities or regional governments were trying to attract some of the big businesses, the Apples, the Walmarts, the Targets, et cetera. It was all about tax incentives, right? It was all about which state could put the best incentive package together that would be most appealing to that company. Now energy is part of that mix. You know, energy is one of those boxes that they want checked off, and that's an exciting development. And when business steps up and takes an advocacy role like that, you know, it makes all of our job that much easier. So I kind of blended two questions in there, the last one and the current one. But, you know, even in Michigan, you know, where, we've seen historic resistance from the big three, in particular on electric vehicles, they finally got it, right? I mean, they're now going all in. GM is talking about a future not that far ahead of us when there will be nothing but electric vehicles on the road, because there will be no reason to have any others. The technology won't be practical in traditional combustion engine vehicles. So we're moving in that direction. GM's acknowledged it, Ford's acknowledged it, the tier one suppliers have acknowledged it, and our nation's auto industry is moving firmly in that direction. So it's an exciting time.
We love talking about electric vehicles in Nevada. And one of the goals that our governor has set forth is to build what he refers to as the electric highway, to take hundreds of miles of roads in Nevada and have charging stations throughout them so that there's no range anxiety out there. I'm really proud that we have an electric vehicle charging station at the office of the Public Utilities Commission right outside my front door in Nevada. And we also opened an investigatory docket pursuant to legislation that was passed by our legislature to look at the infrastructure necessary throughout Nevada and incentives to place in accordance with that infrastructure to promote electric vehicle use throughout the state.
How about Phoenix?
And yeah, I would say, I could talk a lot about electric vehicles, really interesting, but no, I fully see somewhere like Phoenix that where 98% of our building energy uses electricity, where we'd actually have all of our vehicles go to electric as well. And really in Arizona, it's about a quarter of the cost to fill a tank of electric vehicle equivalent. Then they can go faster and be complete zero emission from the tailpipe in the city. So it's like far outperform any ozone standards or anything from the federal government. So it's really incredible the value of both in air quality, in cost savings, and in just really simple maintenance of electric vehicles. So in the long term, and leading the nation, of course, I mean, leading the world is actually more on the Far East as far as all the Asian countries. Japan has, as of last year, has more charging stations than gas stations. And it has, in China, definitely solution to pollution. The mayor and I went to China and met with many of the mayors, and it was amazing how all of them had goals of 10,000 electric vehicle charging stations installed per year. And I thought, well, our 32 isn't very big, but just incredible, just to move very fast and supporting and new electric cars. So I would say there's a real strong sense of it is the best solution for the future. Utilities are extremely excited about it. So when you're working with utilities on it, it's certainly a lot easier. Probably the slowest to adopt might be the car manufacturers, who are probably the ones that have the lowest prediction of adoption rates, which is sort of unfortunate. But 20 vehicle manufacturers do have models of electric vehicles coming out next year. So really, really interesting of what that's like. And one last comment is I did survey. I mentioned that. Really interesting results. It just is coming out right now. You're actually getting preliminary results. But one of them was that 85% of our population said we should make electric vehicle charging on all new homes mandatory, like to put it in there for builders. And then the other one was that 65% said they plan on buying an electric vehicle in the next 5 years. So real good public support and acknowledging that, yeah, they'd love that concept. It really appeals to them. And groups like Electrify America, that has, with the Volkswagen settlement, got $1.6 billion to install charging throughout the US on the highways to kind of eliminate a lot of that range anxiety. So some real planning around that, an entire world of thought leaders around electric vehicles. It's really changing. Okay, how do we accelerate, electric vehicles?
And since you're in Phoenix, I have to ask, did your survey also look at solar and EV combinations, and do your consumers understand the interconnections there of solar-powered homes and how that ties to their electric vehicle?
So we currently, like our state, there's a large surplus of solar power in California, produced in California, and that our utilities really like getting that, where California will pay, like Arizona utilities, a penny per kilowatt hour to take the surplus electricity in the afternoons. So the utilities are reluctant to want to endorse solar just because they can get paid to take energy from California, and they see that being kind of an interesting, so this is kind of an interesting phenomena going on. And so, but certainly that's a great, when marketing it, that concept of going towards providing, having solar capacity and microgrids providing that charging capacity to not create some anxiety from utilities when you want to bring on level 3 charging or something on the grid right in peak times. So there's lots of issues around the planning that utilities, if they can do it in the workplace during the day when there is that surplus power, utilities are getting paid to take the electricity. If they can sell it to electric vehicle owners, they really want to do that. So they want to have like these incredible, they'll pay for infrastructure if you're going to charge in the afternoons. And so real opportunity. So solar is kind of a unique, but now great opportunity for a homeowner to actually have solar charging, battery, charging your car, and having completely renewable energy in home. Yes.
To build on that in your question, Judy, and the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada is looking and has investigations going on right now at making sure that we have the right infrastructure, the right transmission in wires, for lack of a better word, going into homes, and at a neighborhood level, at a micro level, where you can have folks with solar panels on the roof that charge a battery that's in their garage that they plug their vehicle in at night. And something in Nevada, we really like our independence. And that idea of self-reliance is something that really appeals to a lot of Nevadans, that that we're working towards. Charging your own battery by your own solar panels and plugging your car into that. That's a neat idea, and one that we'd like to see come true.
Any other questions from the audience?
Am I on? Thank you. In every group like this, somebody in the back of the audience that points out that in addition to the battery electric vehicle, there is the hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle. And hydrogen is made mostly from natural gas. So in the terms of the title of this symposium, in terms of transition, in a conversation like this, and particularly in a conversation about cities, we absolutely need to include the conversation about hydrogen. The reason why Walmart, Google, Amazon, Kroger are all investing in hydrogen fuel cell forklifts, as unsexy as they are, is there is a need for a 24/7 duty cycle. If we are just putting batteries in cars that have 4% duty cycle, you drive your car 4% of the time. So just putting a battery in it doesn't mean we're going to have less congestion. So if we want to have cars like Uber and the sharing economy fully involved in this transition, we absolutely have to be concerned and educated about hydrogen.
And if I could, is there a question there then? Would you like to pose that as a question for our panel?
I actually would like to suggest to Mark, in terms of your public utilities role, what is the, actually, I'm sorry, from
Joe Reynolds.
Yeah, from Joe. Thank you. From your public utilities role, are you looking at hydrogen as well?
That's really a good question, and there hasn't been a lot of conversations, at least in front of the commission, involving hydrogen. That doesn't mean that there won't be. That doesn't mean that there can't be. As I said earlier, we're a creature of statute ultimately, and so we look to goals that our legislature sets and that are signed in by our governor. But that's something that we have yet to specifically talk about, but there's nothing behind the lack of discussion, if that makes sense, other than it just hasn't come up.
I think there are another couple of hands in the audience.
We've got one here. Hello?
I've got a couple of questions that are related, but the answers will be fairly short. One is looking at the different approaches to this issue for educating people from red states, blue states, and purple states. It seems as if Mark had identified some of the things that we've seen in the past about there's a difference in the views of people who live in cities, which implies versus rural areas, and so I would like to know how that's being addressed. And the second one is, if we're talking about free market development of renewable and sustainable energies, does that mean that any of the states have taken, I don't know that the states can do this, I don't know if it's a federal program or what, can do anything to remove the oil and gas subsidies that they continue to get, I think. And so maybe that's the first one. Are they still getting them? And if so, why?
Let me jump in if that's okay. Good question. On the subsidies issue, I'm not an expert in tax policy, but those are federal issues, and they're largely baked into tax policy. And so when we talk about trying to create a level playing field for all forms of generation, the oil and gas industry will push back saying we don't get subsidies the way solar and wind do, and that's technically true. But they get significantly more than what wind and solar are through tax credits, which are really hard to unpack and create an apples to apples kind of a comparison. But I know that there is interest among Republicans in Congress to find a more equitable playing field for that. And then the first question was about rural areas. In 2016, more wind was deployed in this country in Republican congressional districts than anywhere else. And that's why you're seeing Republicans in more rural states like Iowa and elsewhere fully embracing renewable energy. So it's a place that we're all going, and I think Republicans will continue to lead. But if you look at kind of the world of clean energy advocacy, non-traditional partners are kind of the sexy place that it's all going right now, in the sense that Democrats, the left, are already there. If we're going to make progress, we've got to bring in new constituencies into the advocacy community. And the three hot areas right now are conservatives, business, and rural communities. And I think we're going to see a lot more investment over the coming year in engagement with those three constituencies in particular.
Anything to add from?
There are, yeah, it's interesting, many of the conversations by some of the larger cities. I mean, at Phoenix, fifth largest city in the U.S., you get a concentrated vision of that community, and for rural areas, but there are so many, I look at even, for Fort Collins, is it rural? Maybe not. It's still going down the continuum, so not rural yet, but yeah, certainly maybe was historically. But really connecting with people with opportunities to provide like big solar farms, big opportunities, and really saying what part does all Americans have in our future and role they play, and what kind of country do we want? What kind of, as far as for future and energy security? And so I think there is some resonance with that people do recognize it in both urban and rural areas. And there's some short-term wondering of how that unfolds and how to make sure it's equitable as you kind of go through the country. That's very challenging. But at the same time, I think real opportunities we meet with as part of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. There's some cities there with towns of 5,000 and 7,000 that are being pretty bold and are actually echoing the opinions of really leading the way where they talk to their constituents and actually can be a lot more nimble than the large cities and being really bold.
All right, we have about 2 minutes left. So I'd like to end it with just a quick down the line response. Going back to our session title, cities, states, and corporations leading the way in the uncertain times of federal leadership. So after all of this discussion and all that you've brought to bear in this, is the lack of federal leadership a serious threat? Or is the response by cities, states, and corporations so overwhelming that this train has left the station and we are well on our way to a clean energy transition? Is it a serious threat, or is all of that we've discussed today just too much momentum to overcome to stop that transition? You want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start. There's many things and issues beyond just what we're talking about energy. There's so many issues as a country we have. If you're looking at race and looking at all these, many issues we struggle with and are learning and charting our pathway for the future. And that, it really requires, if the followers lead, the leaders will follow. And it really requires the voice of people to step up and say, no, this is what we want, and really charting that pathway. And, cities are rehearsing our future. They are looking at some really bold moves to really show. And the one thing that people will, if they can see what it is, the outcome, the long-term goal, there's a great consensus on that to say, what is the outcome? What is the long-term? When we're all done, what does it look like? And that's really appealing, and we really need to let that vision be out there for people to see. And I think there is great support from people, our population.
What do you say, Joe? Mark. Let's go right on either way, Mark or Joe.
I'll just say leadership begins at home, and Nevada's path is being led the way by our governor, Brian Sandoval.
I think the answer to both parts is yes. I think that the train has left the station and that there is a certain amount of momentum towards this energy transition that is just now inevitable. It's a question of how much and how fast. Quite frankly, you got to be careful what you ask for, right? I mean, do we really want this federal government stepping in at this point and weighing in? I don't think it would be necessarily to our benefit.
Great. All right.